W is the shortcut for showing the wireframe. We have two main menus here that you want to focus on, which is the paint and also the sculpting. The rest are fun, but for what we need today is these two menus. Sculpt tool. So if you're sculpting, you will notice that it's kind of responsive, but it's not really detailed. So I'm going to undo. You can see the features here of the brush tool. And this is for the size of the brush, but the shortcut is by holding down B as in Bravo, and then with the left mouse button you can drag right and left. If you hit M on the keyboard, that is going to control the strength, but when you click you go up and down, not right and left. You can mirror, and it shows you exactly how you're mirroring, which is very nice. You can also add some distance, so the sculpting would be kind of like stepped instead of going really smooth. It sort of resembles the lazy brush maybe in ZBrush. Flood, it's going to flood the sculpting using whatever pattern you're going with. Based on the sculpting tool, and this technique is actually super useful for what we want because it's going to allow us to make consistent results, and I'll explain later what I mean by that. In a nutshell, flood is the tool that would allow you to, instead of like going here and sculpting everything, if you click flood, it's going to flood it exactly perfectly. It's almost like a fill bucket. You can go here to the cube and go to different views, but one thing you should know that can be extremely useful for what we're trying to do as well is by going to this menu here and going to orthograph. Sure, it doesn't look that different, but if you're applying this on different objects, it will show a lot of difference. And what it does is that it really flattens the perspective, which makes it perfect for painting and sculpting textures. So if I go here to the top, I'm going to go to perspective, so it would stay like kind of something that we can understand, because once I sculpt, I'm going to go back and forth and show you what I'm doing. And later I'm going to be using the orthographic. But for now, what I want to show you is this. In the standard sculpting tool, I'm going to go into stencils. So stencils is basically a texture like this or that, and it's going to allow me to use this almost like basically like a mask. So if I go here and paint, it's going to sculpt it based on that texture. Okay, that's great. So we need to navigate our way with the stencil. So if you click and hold S as in stencil, and then right mouse button, and then left and right, it's going to allow you to scale up and down that stencil. If you also hold S and then with middle mouse button, you can drag it around. And if you hit R on the keyboard, I mean, technically speaking, let me cancel. Technically speaking, the stencil should rotate, but it's no longer rotating, and they kind of broke it, I guess. Notice this. If you click any stencil, Mudbox is going to tell you, here are the shortcuts, right? So the S and middle mouse button, and then the S and the right, and Q is going to activate it on and off. But if you hold R and then right mouse, it's not really rotating, and it's just kind of really weird. It used to work just fine. They broke it, they ruined it. So what is the alternative though? So again, here is some stencil. The alternative would be here by going to the transform, and you can say 90 degrees or 60 degrees. That's how it is. It used to work much more easily, but they broke it. Perfect. Thanks, Autodesk. Okay, what do I need now to continue with my workflow? Okay, so I'm gonna turn off the stencil just so I don't get distracted, and I'm gonna go here and click on add stencil. Look for that seamless texture that I created, this one. Okay, so it doesn't show, I will click Q. Notice here, so on and off, Q is the shortcut for this, Q. And I'm going to choose that new texture that I have. I'm gonna go here and say 0, so it would be perfectly aligned. So what's gonna happen here is that I am going to sculpt using that stencil. And notice here, once the mouse exceeds that limit, it's no longer going to sculpt. Okay, why the result looks like crap? Well, that's because I don't have enough subdivisions. So how do I increase the level of subdivisions? There are two things to know about subdivisions here. Shift D is going to increase the level of subdivisions. Then Shift D again. So now you can see the quality of that sculpting is much more refined in higher resolution. So I'm going to undo. And I'm going to also add one more level of subdivision. So be very careful and as conservative as you need to be with adding subdivisions. But for this practice, I really need a lot of resolution. And even that is not enough actually. The other thing that you need to know about subdivisions and levels is that if you click page down, you will go down in the resolution. Of course, it doesn't destroy the level 5. It just toggles from one form to another, which is extremely important for sculpting, because sometimes you want to modify the geometry in the simplest form, and then when you go and add details, you need to go page up, all the way up to the final level. Of course, you can delete the highest level anytime you feel like you only need 4 levels. So that's a different story. So with that said, now I am at the highest level of sculpting, and you can see it's kind of responsive, but it's a decent computer. So just be careful how far you go with this. I'm going to click Shift F. Okay, so this is the stencil that I have, and you can see it's extremely detailed. The other thing you'll notice here is that really too thorny, which means that I need to lower the threshold down of the sculpting. So I'm gonna click and hold M and then lower that threshold. So let's see what result it's gonna give me. Okay, so it's almost like kind of sculpting the details. I'll just add just a nudge there. Okay. It's still not great. Just for a better result, I'm just gonna go and add 2 more levels of details, which is kind of insane. But hey, since I can do it, why not? It's a little bit too much, so I'm going to just stick to undoing and sticking to level 6. Okay, this looks good. Now I need to just lower the threshold of that sculpting. Click and hold M. The other thing that I want to demonstrate before I really show you how the process is gonna go is this thing here, paint tool, and then I'm gonna go to projection. And as soon as you click anywhere, it's gonna tell you, hey, hold on, do you wanna create a new layer? Now here's the interesting part. It's actually going to be a diffuse layer, which means we have these layers, and yes, you guessed it right. This is how we are going to create our PBR maps. So I'm gonna go with diffuse, okay? Now watch this. When I activate the stencil, it's no longer in grayscale like in sculpting. Now it's kind of confused because it has activated the projection, but it used to show you only as grayscale. And the reason for that is because it uses those stencils as alpha channels. It basically relies on the alpha channel in those stencils in terms of sculpting. But when it comes to painting the texture using the projection, check this out. It's actually painting that texture. Now here is the wonderful mix. I'm gonna go to the top view. I'm gonna zoom out. I'm going to go into orthographic, so it would be as flat as it could be. And before I start painting, I'm going to click here, and I'm gonna go click on this, set current view as home. Okay, which means I can do this and that, but anytime I want to go to that specific one, I can go to home. Zooming in a little bit, click here, home. It goes exactly as it was, which is very, very important, because what I'm going to do is the following. I'm going to go into the sculpting, go into the stencil, which is this one here, and I'm going to really arrange it. And just to ensure that I am on the safe side, because you don't want to have edges that have no sculpting or texture. Since it's a seamless texture, it would be ideal to have it perfectly aligned with the texture. So I'm going with this now. I guess it seems okay. Let me just sculpt on all the edges and make sure that it's doing a good job. Let me just go here and make sure this is like set as new home. And let's see what I have. Yes, I do have a bad edge, so that's not good. Okay, so now I'm gonna go here and click home. Here's the stencil. I'm gonna click S and then middle mouse button to pan it. Scale it up just a tiny bit maybe. Let's undo the sculpting. W to remove the wireframe, because it's kind of annoying to look at. Now if I sculpt here, it looks good. Q to remove the stencil. Okay, it looks good. Now undo, then here, just to make sure, set as home. And now, instead of sculpting with the stencil, even though it's gonna be fun, but it's not gonna give me consistent result. So just to have a proper base, because right now just for demonstration I'm using the mouse, but actually when I do want to sculpt I'm gonna be using my Xencelabs tablet. So instead of struggling with the pressure sensitivity variation that I may have,